Here we are at our second last class of a 24 lesson course. Oh my goodness, and there's still people here. I'm amazed. Ah, well done. All right, goodness, talk about stick-to-itivity. Anyway, so tonight we're going to talk about Jung's Book of the Dead. For modern Westerners, the Red Book appears to be unique. It's so unusual that it does not fit into any of our normal categories. There seems to be no way of classifying its contents. I believe that this inability is actually the result of the ever-narrowing focus of our education system. In Jung's time, and until about the 1960s, classical studies played a large role in young people's upbringing. Because of this immersion in the Greek and Roman texts of classical times, most of them would not have had any trouble recognizing the archetypal situation Jung was describing as a journey to the underworld in order to meet with the dead. The goal of such journeys was to access a higher or more comprehensive truth than that available to ordinary consciousness. Let me just bring up this. Yeah. Okay. There were two different but closely related Greek terms for such journeys. The first was a Nekyia, a ritual by which ghosts were called up and questioned about the future. This is more commonly known as necromancy, which was defined as the conjuring of the spirits of the dead for the purposes of magically revealing the future or influencing the course of events. The second term was Katabasis. The dictionary defines this as a going down or back. In other words, a descent. While this term also referred to the opportunity to converse with the dead, only a Katabasis involved an actual physical journey to the underworld. Such journeys were undertaken by several heroes in Greek and Roman myth. The earliest reference to this cult practice of Nekyia comes in Book 11 of Homer's Odyssey. Odysseus was instructed to make a journey of a very different kind in order to find his way to the halls of Hades across the river of Ocean. There he consults the soul of the priest and prophet Tiresias about the means to return home to Ithaca. In a setting of ghosts and dark blood and eerie noises, like a canvas of Hieronymus Bosch. He sacrifices a ram and a ewe so that the countless shades of the dead and gone would surge around him. He is then able to speak with the souls of the dead and find out how to get home. Odysseus's journey to Hades was followed by accounts of journeys undertaken by other heroes such as Hercules. The Athenian playwright Aeschylus features the use of tombside Nekyia in his books The Persians and The Libation Bearers. Now, Jung used the concept of Nekyia as an integral part of his analytical psychology. As he said, Nekyia is the introversion of the conscious mind into the deeper layers of the unconscious psyche. For Jung, the Nekyia is no aimless or destructive fall into the abyss, but a meaningful katabasis. Its object is the restoration of the whole man. So as you can see from this last quotation, Jung used the terms Nekyia and katabasis pretty much interchangeably. His closest followers also saw them as indistinguishable metaphor for a descent into the dark, hot depths of the unconscious, a journey to hell and death. The practice of katabasis features prominently in the lives of three pre-Socratic philosophers: Pythagoras, who's thought to have died about 495 before the Common Era, Parmenides, who lived in the late 5th and 6th and early 5th century BCE, and Empedocles, who died in 434. In each case, they experienced initiatory descents into the underworld for the sake of knowledge and transformation. So here's quite an interesting painting in the Baroque style by the Italian Salvatore Rosa, who died in 1673. It shows Pythagoras emerging from the underworld. And here he is in the bottom corner here. Pythagoras, the central figure, is depicted emerging from the shadows of the underworld in the far right bottom corner of the painting. He symbolizes a journey of enlightenment or of a profound discovery. Surrounding him is a group of spectators whose gestures and expressions reflect various states of awe, reverence, and contemplation. So, I introduced you last week to this fellow, Peter Kingsley. He's the British mystic, philosopher, and scholar who has written extensively on the journeys of Parmenides and Empedocles. Kingsley argues that the writings of the pre-Socratic philosophers Parmenides and Empedocles, which are usually seen as rational or scientific works, were in fact expressions of a Greek mystical tradition that helped give rise to Western philosophy and civilization. This tradition, according to Kingsley, was a way of life leading to the direct experience of reality and the recognition of one's divinity. Yet, as Kingsley stresses, this was no otherworldly mysticism. Its chief figures were also lawgivers, diplomats, physicians, and even military men. The texts produced by this tradition are seamless fabrics of what later thought would distinguish as the separate areas of mysticism, science, healing, and art. I would highly recommend his 2003 book called Reality, if you're interested in exploring this fascinating thesis. I should also mention that his 2-volume interpretation of Carl Jung's collected works, in light of his Red Book Revelations, is the most thought-provoking book on the subject in English. It is called Catafalque, Carl Jung and the End of Humanity. So unfortunately, we don't have time in this course to plumb the depths of these journeys that these two seminal philosophers describe in their poems. Let me just say that Jung's Red Book follows the same archetypal pattern as the one laid down by Parmenides and Empedocles. In his case, as we have seen, the spirit of the depths draws him away from the spirit of this time into a sequence of dreamlike descents, encounters with figures of the dead, and underworld landscapes. These became the matrix for his distinction between merely rational consciousness and a deeper archetypal knowledge. Commentators explicitly read Jung's path as a Katabasis parallel to ancient underworld descents, emphasizing that his dialogues with underworld guides and the dead are the psychological equivalent of such mythic journeys. Jung's Red Book descent leads him away from a one-sided, disembodied rationality into a confrontation with affect, instinct, and the raw imaginal life of the psyche. His Katabasis may be more accurately interpreted as a descent into the dark depths of the body and the unconscious, rather than a purely intellectual voyage of ascent. Both Peter Kingsley's Catafalque and Jung's Red Book frame Jung's descent as an initiatory journey into the underworld where one meets the dead and the gods together. Kingsley ties this to his earlier work on Parmenides and Empedocles, arguing that the descent of the dead is inseparable from a radical embodied encounter with the depths of sensation and mortality, rather than a flight into abstraction. The outcome for Jung is neither a cosmology nor a metaphysic in the ancient sense, but a symbolic map of the psyche, culminating in the notion of individuation, and the integration of contraries within the self. He reframes the underworld revelation as a series of inner images that become the basis of a so-called scientific psychology. Peter Kingsley and others have explicitly argued that Jung is, in effect, translating the initiatory underworld paths of figures like Pythagoras, Parmenides, and Empedocles into modern psychological language, preserving the structure of Katabasis while changing its ontological focus. So the chart that I sent out on Sunday, which is right here, lines up the journeys that Parmenides and Empedocles made and compares it to Jung on the far right here. Now, we're not going to go into that in any detail, but you may or may not know much about Parmenides and Empedocles, but at least it's interesting to see how Jung has transformed their journeys into a psychological experience. Jung's Red Book and the Katabatic accounts around Parmenides and Empedocles share a common pattern of initiatory descent for the sake of knowledge and transformation. But Jung internalizes and psychologizes what in the pre-Socratics is presented as a cosmological, soteriological revelation mediated by a goddess. Now, the word soteriological is an adjective describing a type of theology dealing with salvation. How am I going to be saved? So now we're going to talk about Jung actually meeting the dead. One of the most surprising lessons Jung was taught in the Red Book concerned his, and by extension, our ongoing relationships with the dead. By the term the dead, he means not just our personal ancestors, but all those human beings who have died before us. In his day, it was estimated that the number of people who had died in previous centuries and millennia greatly exceeded the number of those then living. What the Red Book taught him is that despite their demise, the dead continue to actively share a space with the psyches of the living. In other words, they are lurking in the unconscious. Jung insists that when he speaks of encounters with the dead, he means those who are actually dead. He is not referring to contents he has repressed or personified complexes that dwell in the personal unconscious. Scholarly work tracking his visions between 1896 and 1916 shows that he distinguishes these dead from ordinary dream figures, experiencing them as disembodied souls who approach him from beyond individual life. Now, one of the ways he knows he's meeting a dead person is the chill in the air they bring with them. In the Red Book, Carl Jung portrays his relationship with the dead as a living dialogical encounter in which the dead are not gone, but are, quote, unanswered, unresolved, and unredeemed spirits who make demands upon the living. The ones no longer in a physical body, the discarnate, know no more after death than they did when their lives ended. They do not automatically become wise after death, which is why they intrude upon the psyches of the living and demand answers. They actually depend on the living to further their knowledge. Jung's encounters in the Red Book thus become both a dialogue with the personal and collective dimensions of the unconscious, and a service to the dead. He must answer their questions for himself and for the whole culture. Elijah and Philemon each taught Jung that they and the other figures he met in the imaginal realm are objectively real. They are not symbols. For this reason, he realizes that the dead, autonomous presences who come to him, speak with him, demand answers, and receive teaching, especially the ones in the visions that culminate in the 7 sermons of the dead, are all real. They appear to him as a collective waiting flock, hovering over graves, seeking knowledge, recognition, and integration into the psyche of the living, so that the new can build on the old. That's why Jung treats them not as mere metaphors, but as discarnate souls and ancestral figures whose questions end up helping to shape his understanding of the unconscious and his later psychology. The questions they posed to him, which he felt compelled to answer, did not come from the world around him, but from the dead. So, in 2010, this fellow, James Hillman, who died in 2011, a year after this event I'm going to talk about, who is the founder of archetypal psychology and one of the most prominent psychologists in the United States who emerged from Jung's school, had a series of 15 conversations with Sonu Shamdasani, this fellow, who you already know was the editor and co-translator of the Red Book. Together, they explore a number of issues raised by the publication of the Red Book in the previous year. One of these issues is our relation to the dead and to the figures in our dreams and fantasies. Their dialogues were published in 2013 as Lament of the Dead, Psychology After Jung's Red Book. They make the rather startling point that the questions that occupy you have been handed to you by the dead. As Shamdasani put it, yes, you've been had. You're being used by the dead. And the sooner you realize it, the better. Dead are closer to you than you think. They play a more direct role in your lives than most people realize. Shamdasani revealed that he wasn't editing the Red Book for the living. I was editing it for the dead. Hillman responded with a story of his own. Let's go to the readings now. And so we need some volunteers again, as per usual. Well, let's see who's interested tonight. David Oak is going to be the first one on the list. Thank you. Okay, David, number 1.
Number 1, okay. I used to go to Eranos in Ascona, Italy, and they'd ask, and I'd say, I'm talking to the dead. Every year I'd give a lecture there, but I never thought I was talking to the audience. It was for the benefit of the dead, but it was also addressing the fact that perhaps only they could understand what I was trying to get at. And that's James Hillman, Lament of the Dead. Psychology After Jung's Red Book.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Now, reading this led me to realize that my 50-year fascination with the imaginal realm has been an effort to answer the questions my father posed concerning his own inner country experiences that he documented in his Conversations with a Fish and Others. So yes, I have come to see that in a sense I am being used by my dead parent. And I know that I will be happy if I can satisfy his curiosity to some extent. So how about you? Are you aware of the dead playing a role in your own life? This is a question we can consider during the question and answer section of this class. Returning to Jung, in the visionary episodes in which he meets the dead, they address him and ask him questions about the meaning of life, God, and the fate of the soul. He responds in extended dialogues and monologues that he later described as working over the fantasies, learning how to discriminate their voices, figures, and demands, in order to clarify what the dead seek from him. Jung gradually understands that his role is to be a mediator between the living and the dead, not as a mere interpreter of symbols, but as someone who must accept the dead with love. and give them a place in his consciousness. He is told to listen to their lament, but not to be their blind spokesperson, and to build the future on the wealth of what has become, rather than on a denial of the past. Psychologically, the dead in the Red Book represent archetypal contents of the collective unconscious, including ancestors, cultural values, and historical traumas that have not been integrated by individuals or society at large. Jung's relationship with them is thus both personal and cultural. He realizes that he is not only working with his own inner figures, but is also confronting the spirit of the times and the moral and spiritual crisis of Europe on the eve of the two world wars. In the third section of the Red Book called Scrutinies, the dead appear as a vast impersonal mass, yet each individual soul presses its own question, forcing Jung to recognize that the collective and the personal are inseparable. The dead's insistence on knowledge and redemption underlies Jung's later idea that psychological health depends on acknowledging and integrating what has been forgotten or repressed, including the shadow and the old gods of the past, as we saw last week with Izdubar. As a caring doctor trying to help his patients deal with their suffering, their everyday neuroses, Jung realized that the only genuine treatment often lies in drawing them out from the little world of their personal troubles into an awareness of the suprapersonal connections behind what they are experiencing, into a suprapersonal consciousness with a sense of historical continuity. In other words, he needed to take them beyond themselves. In his understanding, this always involved developing a sense of historical continuity, of knowing which particular questions the dead have left us to answer. Okay, Hangame, you've been very patient. We're ready for you to read 2, please.
This is what the ancient Greeks and Romans meant by the process of being reborn, the mystical process of rebirth out of the personal into the impersonal. Otherwise, everything in an individual's attitude will be obviously wrong. This is how one single person's seeming neurosis can be undone, because what manifests as private neurosis is for the most part simply a lack of history, the collective neurosis of a culture that abandoned its ancestors and in the process forgot itself.
Wow. Okay. So Jung's most concentrated encounter with the dead occurs in the events leading up to the writing of the 7 sermons of the dead. As we will read in more detail shortly, the dead come back from Jerusalem to Jung's house, ring the bell, and beg for his advice. He then delivers a cycle of Gnostic sermon, speaking in the voice of Basilides of Alexandria. He talks about nothingness, the pleroma, God, Abraxas, and the nature of opposites as teachings addressed specifically to these particular dead people. Due to their profundity and dependence on Gnostic teachings, reaching a proper understanding of the sermons themselves would require a separate course. All we can do here is describe the mysterious events preparing the way for their revelation and provide you with a list of their key teachings. By the way, Basilides was an early Christian Gnostic religious teacher in Alexandria, Egypt, who, according to Clement of Alexandria, was active between 117 and 161 of the Common Era, and claimed to have inherited his teachings from the apostle Saint Matthew. And I also supplied that long document on Sunday to you. This is one of the cases where AI is helpful. So it did a nice summary of all of these different features of a very difficult to understand piece of writing. If any of you would like to pursue the subject further, the most thorough, reliable explanation can be found in Stefan Haller's The Gnostic Jung and the Seven Sermons to the Dead. Very thorough, very understandable. And it's 250 pages long, so you can see why we couldn't possibly do much with it today. So let's start by examining two of Jung's most dramatic encounters with a group of the dead. In the 15th chapter of the second book in the Red Book, Jung describes the arrival of a group of dead Anabaptists as he sits in a large, fat woman's kitchen reading Thomas à Kempis's The Imitation of Christ. Sham Dasani provides us with an excellent overview of this important Christian work. Let's go back here, and I see Lisa's going to read this number 3 for us. So this is what Jung was reading at the time.
Excuse me. The Imitation of Christ is a work of devotional instruction that appeared at the beginning of the 15th century and became extremely popular. Its authorship is still in dispute, though it is generally attributed to Thomas à Kempis, circa 1380 to 1471, who was a member of the Brethren of the Common Life, a religious community in the Netherlands that was a prime representative of the Devotio Moderna, a movement stressing meditation and the inner life. In clear and simple language, the Imitation of Christ exhorts people to be concerned with the inner spiritual life as opposed to outer things, gives advice as to how this is to be lived, and shows the comfort and ultimate rewards of a life lived in Christ. The title derives from the first line of the first chapter, where it excuse me, is also stated that anyone who wishes to understand and to savor the words of Christ to the full must try to make his whole life conform to the pattern of Christ's life.
Okay, thank you. Jung's Red Book story features a group of deceased Anabaptists. Anabaptism was a religious movement that originated in the 16th century in Jung's own geographical neighborhood. The first adult baptisms, which were a prominent feature of the Anabaptist movement, took place just down the road from Jung's home in Kuznakt at a place called Zollikon. And just for the sake of argument, I thought I would show you a map. Here is Kuznakt at the bottom here. This is Lake Zurich, and there is Zollikon. And you can see it's a 4-minute drive. So pretty close. So these were hovering around, if you like. So here is Jung's description of meeting the dead Anabaptists. Okay, so we're going to go to Milton for number 4, please.
I would like to imitate Christ. An inner disquiet seizes me. What is supposed to happen? I hear an odd swishing and whirring. And suddenly a roaring sound fills the room, like a horde of large birds, with a frenzied flapping of wings. I see many shadow-like human forms rush past, and I hear a manifold babble of voices utter the words, "Let us pray at the temple." "Where are you rushing off to?" I call out. A bearded man with tousled hair and dark, shining eyes stops and turns toward me. We are wandering to Jerusalem to pray at the most holy sepulchre. Take me with you. You cannot join us. You have a body, but we are dead. C.G. Jung.
Well, okay. How do you feel, Milton? Do you want to just continue on with this passage? It just is a straight
Okay.
continuation.
Who are you? I am Ezekiel, and I am an Anabaptist. Who were those wandering with you? These are my fellow believers. Why are you wandering? We cannot stop, but must make a pilgrimage to all the holy places. What drives you to this? I don't know, but it seems that we still have no peace, although we died in true belief. Why do you have no peace if you died in true belief? It seems to me as if we had not come to a proper end with life. Remarkable. How so? It seems to me that we forgot something important that should also have been lived. And what was that? Would you happen to know? With these words, he reaches out greedily and uncannily toward me, his eyes shining as if from inner heat. Let go, Damon. You did not live your animal. That's interesting.
Hmm.
Okay. I didn't
Okay.
expect that last one.
So in 1918, Jung was to argue that Christianity had suppressed the animal element of their natures. He elaborated on this theme in his 1923 seminar in Polzeath in Cornwall. In 1939, he argued that the psychological sin which Christ committed was that he did not live the animal side of himself. He thus argued that Christianity cut its connection with the physical world and became dangerously unbalanced from a psychological perspective. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung describes the events leading up to the creation of a small book called The Seven Sermons to the Dead. This was to be a rather enigmatic summary of all that he had learned during his encounters in the Red Book. Now, these are kind of long. Lori, I'm going to ask you to read number 6, but I won't force you to do 7 because it's, like I say, quite long.
Okay. Very gradually, the outlines of an inner change began making their appearance within me. In 1916, I felt an urge to give shape to something. I was compelled from within, as if it were to formulate and express what might have been said in Philemon. This was how Septem, Sermons ad Mortios, the seven sermons of the dead, with its peculiar language came into being. It began with a restlessness, but I did not know what it meant, or what they wanted of me. There was an ominous atmosphere all around me. I had the strange feeling that the air was filled with ghostly entities. Then it was as if my house began to be haunted. My eldest daughter saw a white figure passing through the room. My second daughter, independently of her elder sister, related that twice in the night her blanket had been snatched away. And that same night, my 9-year-old son had an anxiety dream. In the morning, he asked his mother for crayons, and he, who ordinarily never drew, now made a picture of his dream. Can you scroll it up, please?
I did it. Sorry, I'm looking at my own notes.
He called the picture of the fisherman. Through the middle of the picture ran a river, and a fisherman with a rod was standing on the shore. He'd caught a fish. On the fisherman's head was a chimney, from which flames were leaping and smoking and smoke rising. From the other side of the river, the devil came flying through the air. He was cursing because his fish had been stolen. But above the fisherman hovered an angel who said, "You cannot do anything to him. He only catches the bad fish." My son drew this picture on a Saturday.
Okay, thank you. And Elizabeth is going to finish this particular tale, I think. Number
Around
7.
around 5 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday, the front doorbell began ringing frantically. It was a bright summer day. The two maids were in the kitchen, which the open square outside the front door could be seen. Everyone immediately looked to see who was there, but there was no one in sight. I was sitting near the doorbell and not only heard it, but saw it moving. We all simply stared at one another. The atmosphere was thick, thick. Believe me. Then I knew that something had to happen. The whole house was filled as if there were a crowd present, crammed full of spirits. They were packed deep right up to the door, and the air was thick. It was scarcely possible to breathe. As for myself, I was all a-quiver with the question, "For God's sake, what in the world is this?" Then they cried out in chorus, "We have come back from Jerusalem, where we found not what we ought." This is the beginning of the Septem Sermones. Then it began to flow out of me. In the course of these 3 evenings, the thing was written. As soon as I took up the pen, the whole ghostly assemblage evaporated. The room quieted, and the atmosphere cleared. The haunting was over. This is Jung, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections.
So, if you continue reading in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, then you get his assessment of the event. So maybe you could finish that off for us, Elizabeth.
Okay. The experience has to be taken for what it was, or as it seems to have been. No doubt it was connected with the state of emotion I was in at the time, which was favorable to parapsychological phenomena. It was an unconscious constellation whose peculiar atmosphere I recognize as the numen of the archetype. It walks abroad. It's in the air. Goethe, Faust, Part 2. The intellect, of course, who would like to arrogate to itself some scientific physical knowledge on the affair, or preferably to write the whole thing off as a violation of the rules. But what a dreary world it would be if the rules were not violated sometimes.
Oh, you didn't realize that Jung had a sense of humor, but there he is. Yeah, thank you. So if you have a copy of Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, you can read the whole text of the 7 sermons on pages 378 to 390. This is the only portion of the Red Book he published during his lifetime. Jung struggled to understand what the dead wanted of him. They seemed to want to take him over psychologically, an act of possession he instinctively resisted. He just could not believe that the right way to relate to them was by being subservient to them. What he learned was that the best way to separate them from himself and to assert his independence was by recognizing and responding to their demands. Shamdasani tells a fascinating story which illustrates how close the dead are to us, virtually in the eaves of the house, as he put it. All right, Belinda, this is number 8. Oh, yeah, I beg your pardon, number 9. What am I saying? Yeah.
Danny. That just brought to mind a conversation I had with Franz Jung's son, at one point where he said he often heard his father knocking around the house still. He just accepted it. His presence was still there. Hillman, Franz Jung lived in Jung's house after Jung died. Shan Dasani, at one point he said he had an anxious stranger come running to the door and say, "I have an important communication to you from your father." He said, "Oh, that's not possible. I'm in contact with him every day. I just spoke to him half an hour ago." James Hillman and Shamstan, Lament of the Dead.
I guess you have to be open to these things. This Franz is the same son who drew the picture that was in the story previously, so he was connected, I guess. So by now it should be clear that the Red Book describes Jung's descent into the underworld. James Hillman says that opening the Red Book is like opening the mouth of the dead. Shamdasani agrees, stating that the Red Book is an attempt to find the way of relating to the dead. Later in his career, Jung would explore previous books of the dead. He examines the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the Egyptian Book of the Dead. He explores Ignatius of Loyola. He examines Kundalini Yoga and considers other religious experiments as parallel to his own experiences. In Catafalque, Kingsley emphasizes the distinction in Jung's Red Book between the spirit of the times and the spirit of the depths as a way of naming the conflict between a rational progressivist culture and the claims of the dead and the ancient past. The dead in this view belong with the spirit of the depths. They represent the living past and the archetypal ground that keeps breaking through the modern ego's defenses. A central theme in Catafalque is that Western civilization itself is effectively a walking corpse, already in a death process that Jung foresaw in the Red Book. So Jung was very aware of the passing of the Piscean age and the beginning of the Aquarian age. But we don't want to go into that particularly tonight. Kingsley uses the image of the catafalque and the presence of the dead to argue that the past and the ancestors are judging our world. The dead become prophetic witnesses to the exhaustion of the spirit of the times and to the need to re-enter the depths that the Red Book maps out. So a catafalque is a raised bier, box, or similar platform, often movable, that is used to support the coffin, casket, or body of a dead person during a Christian funeral or memorial service. And here is a particularly splendid version of one. This catafalque was built to celebrate a requiem mass for Philip II of Spain, who lived from 1527 to 1598. So you can see that the coffin would lie on top of it here. Kingsley reads the Red Book as a prophetic text in which Jung receives teachings from figures who stand in the imaginal realm between the dead and the living. In Catafalque, this becomes a model for how the dead, understood as ancestral and archetypal presences, continue to speak to us. For Kingsley, they point to a wider Greek mystical tradition and a living cosmos that is still trying to save us, even as we ignore them. Jung's message about the dead living among us, asking us questions, will not be easily accepted by a culture that is characterized by the denial of death, the fear of death, a culture that looks exclusively into the future. This malaise was first noticed by Ernst Becker in his 1973, The Denial of Death. The Red Book is offering a way of opening the door, of connecting to the past, to what we so eagerly thrust behind us. James Hillman calls it the revolutionary cure to the real disease of our culture, the denial of death. All right, so Bill, I think you're there. You're going to read number 10 for us.
Yes. Shamdasani, we need the coldness of death to see clearly. He, Jung, states, we cannot live in a genuine way without encountering that, which is also accepting responsibility for history, that to come to terms with not only who we are as individuals, Hillman, but with the culture or the civilization, rather, Shamdasani. And that's the task Jung sets himself. When he reflects on the First World War, he speaks about it in terms of an inner complicity. We are all engaged in this. We are taking part in each murder. What happens in the collective is also taking place within us.
Oh, that's a scary thought. Jung realized that in order for him to understand the world around him, he had to plunge into solitude and undertake an inner journey. That was the only way he was able to reconnect with the living. So what exactly is the relationship between the inner and outer worlds? Are they as separate as we tend to think, or are they more closely connected than we believe? And I wonder if Linda could read this number 11.
Hillman, it may seem as if there are two distinct paths or even stages. You first go in and then you come out with what used to be called the return or the descent from the mountain and so on. But I think there's something else there. I think it's more a matter of realizing that there's a porous permeability between the living and the dead, between life and death. And the way we have set it up is that death and life are opposed, and you must hold off death. And it's the ultimate other, and you die alone. This sort of existential whatever. And what it seems to me, that this offers a completely different way of realizing that the day the world is permeated with the other world in all kinds of small ways, that there are always inner voices, that the dead are cautionary figures, that you are living with the dead, and what you think of as the way of life may be the way of more death, and the way of death may be the way of more livingness, that these are not necessarily alternatives, or that first you do one and then you do the other.
Okay. Thank you. So Shamdasani felt that he was completing Jung's incomplete task through the work he did to bring the Red Book to the world's attention. Number 12 for Thomas. Excuse me.
You're muted, Thomas.
Oh, there he is.
Here we go. Okay. Shamdasani. He struggled with the Leviathan. He never finished. He never brought it to shore. It was too much for him. He left it to
Posterity.
He left it to posterity as a message floating in a bottle. At a certain period, it would come ashore, but he didn't know when.
Oh. Thank you. Jung began probing the depths of the unconscious in order to find his soul and to find out what his personal equation was. Just what was he bringing to his encounters with his patients? In those days, and perhaps even now, psychology maintained that the personal is my history, my parents, my childhood, the trauma, my life, my wounds, my aspirations, all of that. That's me. That's my soul. The deepest feelings and loves and pains that I carry. I just quoted Hillman there. After his experiences in the imaginal realm, Jung realizes that the deeper soul is not personal at all. At the deepest personal level, it's impersonal, an objective soul. None of the material he struggled with in the Red Book mentions his parents, his marriage, his tribulation. The normal view of the personal isn't there at all. But what is there is intensely and deeply personal. So the idea of what constitutes the personal has to be rethought. So, Alan, you get to read our last reading, number 13.
Jung finds that his innermost, the most deeply subjective, is no longer subjective, and that it opens up into something far larger. And that's what, in a certain respect, saves him. In the depths of his solitude, his isolation, in his confrontation with himself, he finds an opening. He finds that what animates his steps is the weight of human history, in the sense of the figures he encounters there, such as the mystic figures and the biblical figures. His deepest conflicts are expressed in the form of the interplay between these images.
So despite the life-threatening challenges he faced in the imaginal realm, it was even more problematic to communicate all that he had learned to the contemporary world dominated by the spirit of this time. Although he made a number of valiant attempts during the remaining years of his life, this task ultimately defeated him. Wow. Yeah, just a second here. Let me just turn off this sharing. So we're having our final class in 2 weeks' time, not next week because there's a feast that night. And it will be called Recapping the Imaginal Realm. It will provide you with an overview of both part 1 and part 2 of this course. The content I will deliver will be much briefer than any of the other classes. I want the majority of our time together to be devoted to a consultation on the following 2-part question. What have you personally learned about, first, the imaginal realm itself, and second, seeing with your inner eye from studying Jung in his Red Book, as well as the numerous other sources we explored in part 1, if you happen to have participated in 2025. I would like to hear from as many of you as possible, especially from those who have been reluctant to speak up until now. I'm also interested to receive feedback from those of you who have been unable to attend the classes in person. Feel free to send me an email with your comments. So I will be posting that question, which is your homework assignment for the next 2 weeks, in my email tomorrow when I send out the link to tonight. So that, my friends, is number 11 finished. Lots and lots of juicy things to potentially talk about here. I see Milton's all ready to go. What are you thinking about?
Yeah, today I guess I thought of it. My daughter has corrected me a few times, and I said I unconsciously did that, and she said, "Unconscious? Did somebody knock you out?" So what's the difference between unconscious and subconscious?
The unconscious is something that you can actually access if you pay attention to it. The subconscious you cannot access, despite your best efforts.
Okay.
I think that's probably a good summary. So you can still use the unconscious, don't say you can't. Sherry and Bill, what's going on over there?
So as I was looking at or reading that and listening to it, I was thinking that there's this thing that I would call a cascading influence of the dead that one can assume from logic. That is to say, that we all experience in our generation the formative years in our lifetime, and that formative age was influenced by people who, to a large degree, when you get to be our age, are dead or very soon will be. And this goes back into history, generation and generation all the way back, so that you could see that someone 4 or 5 or 6 or 20 generations ago is still living through you by the fact of they took part of their life and influenced through the formative years of the life of that next generation after generation. So I was wondering, like, how that aspect of the dead living through us and is that perceived as being different, and if so, to what extent than what is being presented here?
Well, I think it's true to say that the dead have shaped your experiences through their direct influence when they were alive. But what Jung is talking about is the fact that they continue to want to have an impact on your lives. If I'm reading him right, they're the ones that give you intuitions as to what you should do at a certain critical time. That porous membrane that he's talking about between the two worlds allows them to connect with you in small ways. that you probably are not realizing are from them. You're just saying, a thought occurred to me, but who gave you the thought?
I like to take credit for my thoughts.
Oh, how wrong you are.
I mean, I want attribution, I want attributions and trademark rights and everything.
The true entrepreneur. I love it. But sometimes the ideas are not that great, and you don't really want to take credit for them. Let's face it.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, I'm not talking about you particularly, but in general.
Okay.
Yeah.
Put it this way: if you're right, you can take credit. If you're wrong, you can dump it off on an ancestor.
There you go. Nicely put. I don't know if I've answered your question in any real way here, but he's going beyond what they were able to do to shape you while they were alive. So there were things that they really were curious about that they wanted to know more about, for instance, and they may guide you, as I think my father is doing, guiding me to do this kind of a course on the imaginal realm.
But could you not mistake that with something that actually is from that more logical sequencing of generational formative years connection?
I suppose so. Now, I used the example of my father, but I think there are questions outstanding left to us by previous generations that we don't have any idea about who they are. But they have left fields for us to explore and impulses to go and take a look at those fields. Why don't you see if you can answer that question? That kind of thing. So it is, when you don't know the person, it's much more impersonal. And that's what I think he's referring to when you get down to the deepest levels of the unconscious. You don't even know who it is that's speaking to you particularly. Mm-hmm. Maybe in the next world we get to meet them. I don't know. Might be interesting to see how, from their perspective, how the worlds are actually interconnected. We're really in the dark most of the time here, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark.
Okay. Thomas, what's up?
Well, yeah, this is just my reaction. It seems to me that that Jung gradually became more and more obsessed. If I look back at last year's class, we referred to classic commentaries of recognized scholars and so forth. And then we come into this course and we get kind of a more modern context with Jung's own personal life. And so in looking at Jung's personal life, to me, it seems that he was just tending more and more to be consumed by this idea of the reality of the dead. And when he starts talking about that these were real people that were stepping out and talking to him and asking him and demanding, that they answer their personal questions, I just have to feel that's just becoming obsessed. And he sort of slipped over some kind of border point or fell off a cliff. And so I want to take a grain of salt to some of those certainties that he seems to express.
Now, if I can be analytical for a minute, I could look at what you just said as an expression of a rational mind trying to struggle to understand something that is inherently not rational.
Yeah, you could say that.
So, it's not meant as a negative thing, but it's just, that's part of the process each of us goes through when confronting a text like this, which doesn't obey the same rules as we're used to in our day-to-day life.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
I mean, what we're doing was we're trying to step away from the spirit of the times, which every one of us knows about, and that's how you interact with everybody.
Mhm.
And now we're being confronted with the spirit of the depths, which poo-poos that whole thing.
Mhm.
So he lived those experiences up close and personal for many years, and I think has every right to express what the spirit of the depths told him.
Mhm. Well put, Mark.
But I don't know that, I mean, I'm very cautious about saying, oh, no, that doesn't make any sense. Because it's not meant to make sense. He struggled all the way through the book dealing with the opposites. And one of the opposites is the rational versus the irrational, the sensible and the unsensible. So he would say embrace both of them. Somehow or other, you got to accommodate or make space inside your experience for both of them. Difficult. I know it's very difficult, but that's what he's challenging us to do. Lori has got her two hands up here. So I think she wants to respond to this issue. So let's allow her to.
Thank you. I'm thinking like since Young, science is really advanced. And if we think about the Hubble telescope, and I think it's the Weeb or the other telescope that's out in space that is tuned to a certain frequency of light and is able to gather information that you can't see with the human eye. I think that our bodies are, as human beings, we are also have limits to the frequencies that we're able to observe with our senses. Like our eyes can't see the same colors as birds can, and but I think that's a protection because I think that spirit world or the undead, it's just right there. We just don't have the frequency. Our instruments are not tuned to be able to interact with it until after we don't have this body anymore. So that's how I've kind of come to interpret it as we try to make sense of it all, but in the way that we can. But yeah, not having the instrument, some of us can tune it, and I think Young was able to like tune the dial and have access to that. But then I think Abdu'l Baha talks too about the dangers of getting involved in that. You can see what happened to Young too if you don't have a means of like turning it off, or it can really it will cause danger to yourself and maybe those around you by the sounds of it.
And I think those other frequencies are probably more energetic than our bodies are capable of taking in.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the barrier or the guardrails are there for a reason. And we shouldn't be too eager to break down the barriers that are there.
Well, I think Abdu'l Baha too talking about like considering this world the matrix and like we're in the womb as if the baby is in the womb.
Yeah.
And the baby's not so aware of us, but we're aware of it. But there's a problem when the baby comes out too early. Like there are consequences for that. So if we continue that metaphor, like
Oh, nice.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we'll switch over to Jack now. What do you think, sir?
Well, I'm going to rain on your parade, Mark, a little bit.
Okay, let's see if you can do it.
And I'll tell you why. My first comment is it seems to me that Jung was never clear about whether the spirits of the dead were objective disincarnate spirits or symbols of the unconscious. Am I reading that right? Did he sort of argue it both ways?
My sense that he argued it both ways, but I'm going to ask Lynette what she thinks of that question. Oh, you're muted there.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how to speak on that. I just don't know how to speak on that because I'm not clear about really what you're saying. Maybe.
You want to rephrase, Jack?
Yeah, Lynette, in other words, we can look at these spirits of the dead in two ways. we can look at them as symbols of the unconscious mind. And by the way, Mark, I liked your distinction between the subconscious as being more accessible than the unconscious. Are these just symbols that appear out of our psyche in visual form and dreams or visions or whatever? Or was he actually interacting with objective disincarnate spirits? That's what and Mark seems to think he didn't make that quite clear.
Well, that's one of the reasons I end up quoting him so much, because I want him to tell us what he thinks, because he was so close to the subject. But he does make the point that they're not symbols.
Yeah.
Right.
That they have a reality of their own. Sorry. Now, it's not the same as physical reality here. It operates by a different set of rules, but they're coherent rules. We have to recognize that.
Now, here's my second comment. I've got a moral dilemma with this stuff. And I was following along a little bit with what Thomas was saying. That this became an obsessive thing with Jung. And I think it did, clearly. And I'm not sure how much this whole experience really benefited him. Now, Abdu'l-Baha tells us we are not to tamper with the psychic realm. And he explains why. He says these forces are real, they operate. And Laurie gave a very good analogy of a premature birth, which I think was excellent, Laurie, your analogy of a premature birth. So we have warnings about tampering with the psychic realm, and for good reason. Because if I'm understanding Abdu'l-Baha, he's saying those forces are reserved for the next world. Here, our spiritual development consists of prayer, meditation, teaching. Yeah, there's dreams, there's visions, there's study, there's all of those things. So I don't know. I'm morally ambiguous about this, Mark. I understand the necessity of the spiritual journey of facing the unconscious. It seems to me we all have to do that to become, to use Jung's term, to become an individual. That's part of the journey. We can't suppress the stuff we don't like. But it seems to me that I don't know. I get a creepy feeling when when we discuss all this stuff. And I think I'm getting a creepy feeling for a good reason. Anyway, that's just my reaction, that I have a bit of a moral dilemma about this.
You know, I think one of the problems that we're having here is the fact that Jung used the term psyche. And I think he's using it in a different way than Abdu'l-Baha was using the term psychic.
Oh, okay.
I don't think they're the same. So that's one of the reasons I prefer talking about the imaginal realm, to just bypass that whole issue. I mean, the imaginal realm is where your soul lives. So Jung had to visit that in order to be able to access his own soul. That's really the whole point of this exercise of these 2 years or whatever of his doing this. He needed to become real. He was floating around in this rational thought, but he wasn't connected to himself, to his deep, deep self. So each of us as Baha'is is encouraged to become more and more aware of our souls. And we're also, as I'll talk about next week, or 2 weeks from now, Abdu'l-Baha and Baha'u'llah both talked about the fact that there is such a thing as malakut, which is the Arabic term for the imaginal realm.
Yeah, for sure.
So they have validity. But to what extent do we need to investigate them? That's another question altogether. Now, Jung went further than probably you would want to go in his investigation.
Anybody else would want to go, I think.
Well, yeah, he had some pretty scary experiences, but he was living at a time where the world around him was falling to pieces. Right? He was right on the verge of World War I. So he could sense the tension in the air, if you like, as he saw in those 3 or so dreams that he had before the Red Book began. So he was alive to the circumstances that he was living in. And in order to understand them, it was important for him to go to the imaginal realm and get some distance so he could appreciate what the heck is going on here.
So you're saying the imaginal realm is not the psychic realm? Or are you saying...
Well, this is where things are hazy to me. I think the psychic realm is probably one of the lowest levels of the imaginal realm. In our world, the physical world, we have all these realms, right? From the mineral to the vegetable, to the animal, to the human, to the divine. And I think that's probably true of every one of the worlds of God, that they have subsections, if you like. And I'm thinking that this psychic realm, where the psychics go in order to talk to people who are supposedly dead, are probably bottom feeders. Whereas the people who have visions, like some of the ones we studied in part 1 of this course, they had fantastic visions. And Jung himself was meeting Elijah, for instance. So what's that all about? So those are higher levels, to my mind, of the imaginal realm.
But, okay, I don't want to talk too long because others have, Elizabeth and Belinda, want to say something. But I think, I have a friend who's since passed on, George Kokut. She was the founder of Spiritual Frontiers Canada. Very lovely guy. And he told me that he had a breakdown over this kind of stuff because he told me that he accessed the Kundalini energy. I mean, I'm not going to go into that right now, but he accessed the Kundalini energy and he wasn't ready for it. And it completely overwhelmed him. And he actually had a breakdown, nervous breakdown about it.
That's a common thing with Kundalini. It's exceptionally strong.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be tampering with that at all.
And that's why I asked you the question. I'm not sure what is legit in all this and what isn't legit. And so that's why I asked the question. So I'm left with a certain moral ambiguity about this.
Well, it's actually good that you raised it, Jack, because I'm certain other people have that feeling as well. And it seems to me that at our present state of knowledge, this points to the need to investigate further. I think, to a large degree, we're out of our depths. We don't really understand what it is we're probing here. But that will come with more people spending time thinking about these things and experiencing them to a certain extent.
Okay.
I really think that's what this is all heading towards, that Jung is suggesting, don't follow me, but go and find out for yourself. Also, and then maybe some of these issues will be seen as problems with nomenclature, that the psychic realm and the imaginal realm are two different things, or we won't know until we know more about the whole issue, if you see what I'm saying. rather than closing the door at this point and saying, oh no, I can't go there. Because that sounds like it's the psychic realm.
I would like to just mention that different people have different tolerances for working in this field. And some people's psyches are much more porous and they really don't have as much guard. It takes a lot of a very, very strong conscious ego to be able to hold as a container to hold these things if you're going to open to them. And Jung was a very exceptional man. I couldn't do what he did. I have my own way of approaching that, but I'm a very, very porous. I have a very porous nature as well, and so these things don't sound so strange to me at all, where they might feel very strange to someone else. So I have more tolerance, and we all have to be careful what our boundaries are around that.
Oh, that's well put. Thank you very much. Okay, so sorry, Elizabeth, you're eager here. You're muted though, unfortunately.
Jack already mentioned what I was going to say is that well, the whole sort of subject of spiritualism interfering in psychic forces that we cannot understand. We won't understand them until we get to the next world. And I had an aunt, who tended to maybe tendency towards spiritualism. She really was missing, members of her family who had passed on, and she was kind of wanting a way to communicate with them. And I was able to tell her the Baha'i faith, saying that that these forces do exist, but we're not to interfere with them. But nevertheless, in my life, from time to time, I've without me necessarily seeking these messages out, I've had messages from people in the next world, who've sent me messages that have had an influence, on my life. Say, well, okay, get up, you must emigrate to Canada, and then there's some, and then an aunt and uncle, come to me in the prayers and say, wanting me to say prayers for their daughter. We do. That somehow these people try to communicate us, get messages to us, but at the same, well, mind you, these messages don't happen all the time. It's just very, 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 very occasionally, but without me necessarily, seeking them out. But but at the same time, I really wanted to say we should be familiar with the Baha'i teachings, on spiritualism. Well, of course, I'm sure a lot of people who miss their family members who passed on, that they won't want some way to communicate with them, and I guess that's normal. But at the same time, in the Baha'i teachings, to say there are limits to this. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
And one of the safer ways for them to communicate with us is through dreams.
And prayer.
And prayer, yeah. So we have avenues, but maybe we should be content with that. But, the curious part of my brain says, well, I'd like to know more. Alan, what are you going to say?
Yeah, this has been a very opening discussion, study. So I met a lady many years ago now who told me a story. They were on their way pioneering to Africa and were standing at the ship's rail waving to their friends. And her husband, who was standing beside her, took 2 steps sideways to his left, and she looked across at him and wondered what had gone wrong, why he had taken those sideways steps. And then the lifeboat davit crashed down where he had been standing. And she this was a gentleman who later became a member of the House of Justice, and she asked him why had he taken those steps. And he said, I don't know. I felt like I was being pushed.
Right. Yeah.
I love it. It's a great story. I wonder if he ever found out who had actually pushed him. Oh, very interesting story. Okay, Bill, you look like you're ready
Yeah.
to communicate here.
Well, it is, I'm very simple. I don't quite get like these two juxtaposition things. One is that we're supposed to seek the truth, and at the same time, I'm hearing a lot of like, well, maybe not really, or be very, very careful, or don't go that way. And I'm like, I know this is oversimplifying, and I'm missing some major understanding here, but I do see a contrast between those two endeavors.
I mean, I guess I'm guilty of being one of those people who wants to know more, who wants to investigate. But I'm also I like to think that I'm cautious and that I am aware of some of the guidance that we've been given. It may be that I overstep, and I'm sure life will have a way of showing me that I've overstepped. But how in the world are we ever going to grow if we don't push the boundaries? That's what it comes down to. I want to know more about the soul. But how long says that we need to know more about the soul? That so far what humanity knows about the soul is totally wrong. Okay, there's a challenge for us to get it right somehow. How do you do that?
Personally, it seems to me that if if you get wounded on a mission, then you deal with that. But the mission, you're on that mission for a reason, and seeking the truth is a mission. And if in the process you have, if I have a nervous breakdown, that'd be bad. But I would feel like I had that nervous breakdown in pursuit of something worthwhile, to the degree to where I'm going to have to recover from a nervous breakdown to continue that mission.
Yeah.
You're a brave soul, Bill.
Just masochist, I think, is a better
word. No, you're right. I mean, you accept the risks, just like Jeremy Hansen is accepting the risks right now up there in space. He had to talk to his family and say, okay, there's every possibility that I might not make it back. This is what you could do under those circumstances. Well, they talked about it right up front. Good for him. That's all we can do. We don't know anything. For sure. So I see we're at 1 minute to 9. Oh, Jack, you have another question?
Nope, I got a comment. I have a comment. I think we all want to know more about the soul, Mark. I certainly do. But Baha'u'llah says it's a divine mystery, right? And I don't want to use the word satanic here because that gets everybody panicked. But Baha'u'llah does say, and I'm not saying this is what Jung was doing, okay? But Baha'u'llah says there are two kinds of knowledge. He says there's divine knowledge and there's satanic knowledge. What does he mean by satanic knowledge? I don't exactly know. But he acknowledges that it exists. So my search for truth, Bill, to speak to you directly, is I've got to follow the guidance that's in the writings. And the Guardian said about mystical experiences, and this is written, and by the way, I've had those throughout my life. Ever since childhood, I've never sought one. They come to me naturally when I'm least expecting it. But the Guardian said, we don't have to go looking for a mystical experience. He said, if we are going to learn something, we can be sure that God will reveal it to us. But we shouldn't wander off trying to Mark, I'm not saying that's what you're suggesting either. But what I'm saying is there's a danger in getting obsessed with these kinds of things. Oh, I want to have a mystical experience, you know. And Elizabeth spoke about the natural means. Absolutely. There are dreams, we get intuitions where people can speak to us from the next world through prayer, through meditation. My mother came to me in a dream and we spoke telepathically. That's never happened to me before. She didn't open her mouth, but I was able to read her thoughts. She was showing me abstract art and she said, look what I can do now. So I think, you know, these means are available to us through natural means. And we don't necessarily have to go looking for them. Maybe Belinda's disagreeing with me. I don't know. But anyway, I hope I'm not, Mark, discouraging you in any way, shape, or form, but I'm on this, we're all on the same journey. That's for sure. And I want to know more about the soul too, but it's one of the greatest mysteries. And I mean, I think many things will be revealed to us in the next world. That doesn't mean we shouldn't look for them here, but I think the means have to be the means that are prescribed to us. That's just my own opinion. If somebody else wants to be more adventurous, go for it.
Yeah. But I think one of the safeguards that distinguishes divine knowledge from satanic knowledge is the spirit in which you pursue it. And if you're doing it in the spirit of service to others, not just to yourself, I think you're probably on the right side of the path. It's when it becomes just about you, you know, you want to self-aggrandize, then you're in deep trouble. You're in the satanic realm, I think. But that's just a quick thought. Now, David, you had a final comment, and then we're going to close.
Okay. I just thought maybe if somebody or some people could come up with a little more guidance from the writings on this issue, it might be helpful. Another thing is, you know, somebody was saying that God speaks to all of us, and one of the ways that God speaks to us is through the writings. You know, pick up a book and read it, and God is speaking to you. That's I think the key here, like you were just mentioning, Mark, does it make you transcend yourself, or does it make you, let's say, egotistical? Certainly, as a graduate of the university, I've seen an awful lot of people, not necessarily, you know, maybe they were professors of physics or political science or that, but certainly allowed their knowledge to inflame their egos.
Yeah, this is true.
And that, to me, I think that's the center of, like what we're discussing here. Does it? How do we do it in a way that doesn't inflame our egos?
Humility, that's the number one watchword here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think this is very good if, in the sense of it, you know, having us overcome our egos, you know, so that reality can flow through us.
Nice. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but anyway, that's it for tonight for me.
Okay, I think that's it for everybody.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to the homework that you guys are going to do over the next 2 weeks, at least an hour a day. Yes. Just trying to answer the question I'm going to send out tomorrow. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to it.
Are we not getting together next week?
No, there's a feast next week. So the last class is on the 15th of April, which I will also indicate in my email.
Sounds good.
Okay, Mark, so you haven't given us the homework yet, eh?
Well, I did verbally, but I'll give it to you in writing, virtually, tomorrow morning.
Okay, homework.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, so
Thank you.
have a great time, everybody.
Good night.
Great.
Enjoy the rest of the spring.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank
Night,
you.
all.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Dave.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Stay well.